thank you. Thank you, Victoria. Also, thank you to iReMMO for organizing this event. You've been doing such great work and putting all efforts to promoting knowledge on Yemen here in France and also elsewhere, of course. So my name is Sandra Carboni. I'm a research analyst with ACLED, which is the acronym for Armed Conflict Location Event Data Project. We collect data on political violence and protests across 90 countries in the world. We've been working on Yemen since 2017, releasing the first data in 2018. We've collected around 30,000 single discrete events, including airstrikes, artillery, battles, and protests, whatever, and trying to kind of promote knowledge in this sense about the war in Yemen and more generally about how political violence looks like. So I'm joined here today by three excellent speakers. We have Majed, the Executive Director of the Sana Center for Strategic Studies, one of the finest experts on the conflict in Yemen, who's going to actually provide some sort of background to the war and also tell us a bit more about the actors and the recent developments in the conflict. Then we have Claire Duong, who was actually head of mission for Médecins Sans Frontières in Yemen until February, and you're going to actually also go back to the country in September. She has also worked in other kind of conflict-ridden contexts like Jerusalem, like South Sudan, Myanmar, Eritrea. Yeah. So she's going to actually give us a bit more of a glimpse about the humanitarian situation and the work of MSF in Yemen. And then we have Franck Mermier, anthropologist, has written extensively about Yemen and not only about Yemen. The most recent, I think, book is Écrire la guerre, Yemen, Écrire la guerre. Okay. And who's going to actually probably give us more of a comment about the societal, on the impact of the war on politics, on society, in of course, contemporary Yemen. Without much further ado, I'll leave the floor to Majed and about what's going on in Yemen in the last few months. I'll give Mike.
Majid will he apologizes first of all that he's going to speak in Arabic and I'll do the translation. Go ahead.
اوكي مرحبا جميعا. انا سعيد اولا بهذه الفرصه للحديث هنا.
Welcome everyone and I'm really happy that we have this opportunity and thank you all for coming.
طبعا هو فعليا لافت للنظر اقامه فعاليه في باريس على الاقل بعد 4 سنوات. هذه العاصمه كانت بعيده عن الحدث اليمني باشكال عده لكن مؤخرا حدث اهتمام في اليمن.
We believe it's very essential to do this first public event in Paris. In Paris, after 4 years and such kind of events haven't been done and the public here have not been engaged on the Yemen issue, and I think this is a rare opportunity and we're trying to make use of today. And it seems there is some controversial debates around the arms sales here in France. Maybe this is a good opportunity to shed light on a forgotten war. I'll start my talk with giving some overall introduction on the recent developments in Yemen. At least on the military escalations in Yemen now. Which comes as an aftermath of the Stockholm Agreement, a peace agreement entitled the Stockholm. The UN Envoy's office has announced for a unilateral withdrawal of Houthis from Hudaida. and he described that as a successful event. But that was countered by an opposition and refusal of the other warring party, which is perceived as a submission of the ports from one hand into another hand of the same person. And that led to a high level or escalation in the conflict. If it was a success, it could have eased the political process, but it led to more tensions. Even some stagnant and quiet front lines have been activated to a great extent. Now we have an active front line in the northern part of Al-Dala governorate. For 4 years, these areas haven't witnessed any front lines or any clashes. And these conflicts are extended within 100 kilometers. In the surrounding of Hudaydah, which is supposed to be de-escalated, the level of clashes have exceptionally increased. Also in Taiz started yesterday, and today there is there was somehow quiet de-escalation of the fights between Houthis and the other sides for about a year in Taiz. Yesterday and today these clashes have extended and resumed in Taiz. In contrary, also there is political escalations from the international recognized government against the UN envoys to Yemen, Martin Griffith. And this adds to the complication of the UN intervention in Yemen, and also for the opportunities of resolving conflict in Yemen. But let me just bring some basics about Yemen to you, for who doesn't know Yemen. This is the Yemen's map.
هذه المنطقة المظللة بالأخضر هي مناطق سيطرة الحوثيين.
The green, الأخضر ولا اللون الثاني؟
الأزرق.
The light blue side on the left side, that's the areas under control of Houthis.
المناطق اللي هي ساخنة هي المناطق الحمراء اللي فيها مناطق اشتباك بين الأطراف.
The red color are the active front lines between the both warring parties.
تداخل ليست مناطق اشتباك.
They are both sides are engaged in these areas.
يعني بعض الأحيان تسخن بعض الأحيان لا.
Sometimes they have active front lines, some not.
ما تلا هذه المنطقة هي تحت سيطرة الشرعية.
The other sides and the other color is under the control of the international recognized government.
لكن أيضا مساحة شوية مظللة لأنه أحجام السكان تتباين.
But this might be misleading given the fact that the number of population in the areas are different.
الكتلة السكانية الكبيرة في شمال اليمن.
In the northern of Yemen, which is under the control of Houthi, it is the most populated area.
وفي أيضا في مناطق الوسط والجنوب.
And also in the middle and in the south as well.
أيضا فيها الشرعية فيها كتلة سكانية. المناطق اللي في الأخضر هي مناطق سائلة، هناك حركة للجماعات المتطرفة فيها. القاعدة وداعش.
In the big geographical area on the right hand side, there is
اللي هي بالأخضر.
The green areas. The green areas are where there are Al-Qaeda and Daesh movement.
هي مناطق حركة بطريقة ما، يعني هذا تشكيلة خريطة القوة التي استقرت تحديدا منذ 4 سنوات بدون أي تغيرات.
This is in a nutshell where each side is situated, and there hasn't been a lot of changes for 4 years.
في السنة الأولى كان الحوثيين يسيطروا حتى مدينة عدن في الجنوب.
In the first year of the conflict, Houthis were also controlling Aden, which is the south of Yemen, which is now under the control of the international recognized government.
حينها بدأت عملية التحالف، إعلان التحالف والمقاومة.
The coalition, the Saudi-led coalitions, with the support of supporting the local resistance in Aden,
تم إخراج الحوثيين
have managed to push Houthis out
الحدود الحالية للصراع.
to this new structure.
التغير الوحيد حدث منذ عام وشوية.
The only change that happened for about a year
وابتدأ تحديدا من باب المندب
started from Bab al-Mandab
وصولا إلى جنوب مدينة الحديدة حيث
to reach to the south part of Hudaydah city.
كان واحد من تقدم سريع للقوات المحسوبة.
It was one of the fastest ways where the forces managed to proceed.
هذا التقدم الذي كان متسارع وكان يضغط على مدينة الحديدة تم إيقافه لاحقا بما عرف باتفاقية السكون.
This rapid progress from the international organized government forces have been put on hold since the Stockholm Agreement.
الصراع في اليمن يخفي طبقتين من الصراعات.
Conflict in Yemen has two different layers which are hidden.
الصراع المحلي
The local conflict,
اللي هو الصراع تحديدا مع جماعة الحوثيين.
mainly the conflict with the Houthis,
في المقابل الحلف المناوي للحوثيين وهو يضم مروحة من القوى.
and also the coalition that is anti-Houthi, which is a combination of different groups.
على رأسها الحكومة الشرعية لكن هناك قوى أخرى.
Is led by the internationally recognized government, but there is also other parties within.
السلفيين.
There are the Salafists.
هناك قوات ما يطلق عليها المقاومة الوطنية بقيادة طارق.
There is also the national resistance, which is led by Tariq, who is the nephew of من هو طارق
محمد صالح.
طارق محمد صالح, who is the nephew of former President Saleh.
وهناك أيضا القوات الجنوبية
And
المجلس الانتقالي.
And also there is the forces of what is called the Southern Transitional Council,
تحت
STC.
عنوان أيضا الحكومة الشرعية هناك عدة قوى سياسية.
And also there are some other political parties under the internationally recognized government. One of these political parties is the Islah, the Brotherhood Party.
وأيضا لديك المؤتمر الشعبي.
Also you have the General Progress Conference, which is the GBC.
كان منقسم تحديدا ما بين الحوثيين وجزء منه مع الشرعية.
During former Saleh, before he was killed, the GBC was divided into two sides, one with the international recognized government and one side with the Houthis.
كانت الكتلة الكبيرة مع الحوثيين لكن بعد لقطة
The majority of the GBC grassroots were under the Houthi control, but after the killing of Saleh,
انقسم المؤتمر في الشمال.
the GBC has divided again in the north.
وأيضا اتحد جزء كبير منه ضد الحوثي.
And some of the GBC followers also joined the international recognized government.
هذه ديناميكية التحولات في هذه هي التحالفات الجبهة الداخلية الطبقة.
These are the coalitions of the local conflict.
الآن لديك طبقة التأثيرات الإقليمية تحديدا في الصراع.
Now we have the different levels, which is the regional level and the dynamics in the conflict.
هناك كانت بالبداية تحديدا طرفين أساسيين.
At the beginning there were two main parties.
إيران وحزب الله يقومون بدعم الحوثيين.
Iran and Hezbollah supports Houthis.
وبالمقابل السعودية والإمارات يقومون وتحالف على الأقل يقوم بدعم الحكومة.
And on the other side we have the Saudi-led coalitions, Saudi and UAE, supporting the internationally recognized government.
ديناميكية الصراع الإقليمية أيضا وتطوراتها انعكست على مزيد من التعقيدات في الملف اليمني.
The regional dynamics and the escalation of the conflict regionally have been reflected also on the Yemeni conflict.
الآن الانقسام الخليجي أيضا يصب على المزيد من اللاعبين الذين يؤثرون في المشهد اليمني.
And also the division within the Gulf has also created more players who are engaged separately in Yemen.
وهذا أيضا يعني اليمن تصبح بذلك هي الساحة التي يتنفس فيها أي صراع على المستوى الإقليمي.
Yemen is becoming now the battlefield where regional conflicts breathe in or have more space to fight.
تحديات مختلفة في الوضع باليمن.
There are different challenges in Yemen.
بما فيها الوضع الإنساني.
The humanitarian situation.
انفلات أمني واسع في كل المناطق.
There is a lack of security in most of the areas.
وهناك التحدي الجذاب عادة في العالم الغربي هو موضوع الإرهاب.
And the key challenge is terrorism.
تحدي الإرهاب تحديدا في اليمن واحد من أكثر العناصر التي تتربح من الحرب.
The factor or the challenge of terrorism, which is profiting a lot out of this war.
يتغذى تحديدا على أولا انعدام الاستقرار وثانيا على الهوية الطائفية كأحد محركات الرصد.
They have been benefiting due to the lack of security, but also they have been fueled by the sectarian ideological وضح هذه.
يعني الصراع الطائفي هوية الشيعة والسنة.
They have been motivated by sectarian factors, Sunni and Shi'i, especially the Qaeda.
هذا يحرك ينشط هذا بالإضافة للحوثيين.
This activates the role. Houthis also are being also instigated by such sectarian ideologies.
لديك الآن فعليا حالة سيولة خصوصا بعد انتهاء دولة داعش.
After the end of ISIS, فين؟
في سيولة حركة مقاتلين تذهب وتأتي الآن في مناطق اليمن.
There is an active mobility of Daesh around in Yemen,
وصولا إلى السواحل الصومالية
reaching to the Somali and Djibouti coasts.
هذه المنطقة هي حركة سيولة مقاتلين.
This is an area where fighters can move easily, and there is also smugglings of arms and weapons.
واليمن الآن مفتوحة على كل العوامل.
Yemen is open for different factors, for different fronts. That is in a nutshell about Yemen.
Maybe we have time actually to ask a few more questions. Who are the Houthis? How do you think they've managed to actually survive, to actually like a coalition of Saudi Arabia, of the United Arab Emirates, of such a collection of different forces for almost 5 years now, despite them being a small, or originally being a small group?
كيف الحوثيين بعد 4 سنوات؟ طبعا الحوثيين هم جماعة متماسكة بالطابع الايديولوجي الديني.
Houthis is a very solidated group. They're very interconnected.
ذات هوية سلفية زيدية إذا صح الوصف.
They have a Zaydi identity, more of a Salafist ideology, a Salafist Zaydi ideology, as radical as it can be.
عندها تعريفات متطرفة تحديدا للمذهب الزيدي.
It has radical definitions of Zaydism sect.
هي استطاعت أن تنشئ بنية تحالفات قبلية في مناطق الشمال.
It managed to establish good tribal coalitions in the northern part of Yemen.
استفادت تحديدا في البداية من تحالفها مع صالح.
It benefited a lot from its allegiance or coalition with Saleh.
والضعف الشديد لمركزية الدولة كان بعد 4 سنوات من عدم استقرار في المرحلة الانتقالية.
And the weakness of the central state of Yemen after 4 years of failed transition. After 2011.
والأهم من ذلك هي استفادت من شيئين، استفادت أساسا من فساد وسوء إدارة الحكومة.
It benefited from the corruption and the mismanagement of the internationally recognized government.
ومن سوء إدارة التحالف لمعاركه في اليمن.
And also the mismanagement and the wrong approach of the coalitions and conducting its operations in Yemen.
على المستوى العسكري يدير الحوثيين حرب بحرب عصابات تستفيد من الجغرافيا جيدا.
On the military side, Houthis operate on militarily on a gangster style, where they make use of the geographical areas in the northern side.
ويجند كل الموارد المتاحة له ولا يؤدي أي خدمات تجاه المناطق اللي يحكمها، لكن يجند كل الموارد التي في إطار ماكينة حربية جيدة تستفيد من القدر.
They utilize all the revenues and income of the states to recruit and make its military operations very active. They don't provide basic services within the areas they are operating in.
ويدير معركة يعني بقدر عالي من الكفاءة.
And they manage their battles with high quality.
في المقابل الجهة المقابلة ليس لديها مجموعة انقسامات عديدة.
The other side have different, or they are disfragmented.
لديك فساد، لديك سوء.
They have the economy, they have mismanagement.
ولديك أجندة متضاربة لحلفاء الإقليميين.
And they have conflicting agendas of the regional powers.
لديك الإمارات التي
For instance,
نزعت سيطرة تحديدا في مناطق الجنوب وفي السواحل اليمنية.
UAE is interested to have dominance over the coastal areas and the southern area parts of Yemen.
ولديك السعودية المرتبكة في عهد محمد بن سلمان التي تنقل السلطة من جيل إلى جيل ولا تدرك مع ذاتها.
And we have the confusing rule of Mohammed bin Salman, where they transfer power from one generation into another without realizing these transformations. That is.
Perhaps just one very quick question. On the other side, the coalition, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, they are usually said to be acting together with a sole goal, which is defeating the Houthis. But are they united? Do they have the same goals in Yemen?
واضح انه في اجنده متضاربه على الاقل هذا المرء
There is obviously there is competing interests and agendas of both sides.
يعني السعوديين لديهم مصلحة حقيقية في هزيمة الحوثي لكن لا يمكن كيف يفعلون ذلك.
For sure, Saudis have their objective is to defeat Houthis, but apparently they don't have the right approach to do so.
الحوثيين يشكل بالنسبة لهم خطر في خاصرتهم الرخوة.
Houthis poses a threat on the southern borders of Saudi.
خصوصا في إطار تحالف الحوثي مع إيران فبالنسبة لهم هذا خطر حقيقي.
Especially there is some sort of coalition between Houthis and Iran, and that is a real threat for Saudis.
لكن الإمارات لديها شيء آخر تفعله.
For the UAE, they have different interests in Yemen, and they do different things.
تحديدا الإمارات تدير انتشار سيطرة على قوى في مناطق الجنوب وتطل تحديدا على السواحل اليمنية.
It seems that the spread and the presence of UAE in Yemen is focused on the coastal areas in Yemen, and they try to have dominance over the active local actors within these areas.
وبالنظر إلى القواعد العسكرية التي تنشئها على الجانب اليمني من الساحل من البحر الأحمر، إضافة القواعد في أرتيريا والصومال، واضح أنها تنشئ منطقة أمنية مغلقة في جنوب البحر الأحمر.
And given where they position their bases in Yemen and also on the other parts of Somalia and Arteria, that shows that their interest in the southern part of the Red Sea, and they try to create a security vacuum to be in control of.
تحديدا الملف اليمني منصة لإطلاق طموحها الإقليمي.
They are using Yemen as a platform to release its regional ambition.
السعوديين ليسوا بصدد الخناق مع حلفائهم.
Saudis is not in a position where they start conflict with their ally.
هم بحاجة إلى الإمارات.
They need UAE at this point.
لديهم مشاكل كافية مع قطر.
They have inner problems with other Gulf countries like Qatar and others.
الموضوع مؤجل.
Maybe the conflict between UAE and Saudi is delayed to some future time.
Perhaps just one very last question before also we open. I mean, we can ask questions to Majid also in the discussion later. But one last question, with the peace process that started kind of in Hodeidah stalling and being criticized for not actually having results, concrete results. There are calls already for a military solution. Is it a feasible? Is it a feasible solution?
طبعا دعونا نتحدث بصراحة. قبل طبعا الحل العسكري هو حل مكلف إنسانيا.
The military option is very costly, especially on the humanitarian
لكن
level.
نتائجه السياسية واضحة.
But its results, its political results are obvious.
هو سيغير وزن القوى.
It will change the way of power.
وسيضعف الحوثي.
And it will weaken Houthis.
بالمقابل أيضا سلام متعثر وكلفته الإنسانية.
And also, unsuccessful peace also has its own cost.
لأنه الآن منطقة الحديدة تشهد اشتباكات نشطة بدون توقف.
Hodeidah now has very active battles non-stop.
الموضوع توقفت المعارك في قلب المدينة لكن لم تتوقف في أرجاء المحافظة.
It's true that the battle has stopped at the heart of the city of Hodeidah, but not in the other areas of the Hodeidah governorate.
فالكلفة الإنسانية لهذا الإيقاف غير واضح، يعني بدون تقديم حلول واضحة للموضوع ليس فقط الحديدة، معالجة الملف اليمني لن تنتج هذه الحلول الجزئية أي حل.
But also putting this battle on hold and also putting the peace process on hold does not also help Yemen in general.
And perhaps we can actually move from this point onto the humanitarian situation in Yemen. And we have Claire. We said she worked for MSF and has been to Yemen last time in February, in between January and March. Sorry. So first of all, before we actually go into the detail, what does MFS do in Yemen? For how long has been in Yemen, and perhaps you can tell us a bit more about your work.
Yeah, so MSF has been back in Yemen in 2007 for the conflict in Saada Governorate, and for the issue also of the migrants coming from Somalia to the shores of South Yemen. Since then, we have been in Yemen non-stop, and we've been from 2 sections of MSF to 4 sections of MSF after 2011. And we are now working in 15 hospitals. So when I say working, it means we have a permanent presence of doctors, including very specialized expatriates managing the hospital. And we are supporting 22 hospital health structures in 13 different governorates. Mostly in the, I would say, mostly in the highlands, so the populated part of Yemen, but also in Mocha and Aden, which are in the coast of the south, in Laj and Abian also. So initially we intervene mostly to as a emergency response to a conflict, and so we direct our response to emergency services, so emergency rooms in the hospitals. So in all hospitals where we are working in the emergency rooms. Now we also have projects that are focusing on mother and child, because what we have seen since we are here, and mostly since 2011, 2015 also, is degradation of the health system itself. Well, the health system in Yemen was not a very, very good health system, especially in the countrysides, where health facilities were not working very well. But now a lot of them are closed, and since 2015, people are not paid anymore, so the health personnel are not coming to work in hospitals and health facilities. A lot of this, the health system is supported by the humanitarian community. So some of them by MSF, but also many other organizations, and a lot by the UN that receive a lot of money. It's one of the biggest operations in the world, and one of the biggest operations in the time also. So there's a lot of money from the humanitarian community coming to Yemen, supporting all the health facility in Yemen. I mean, almost all, if the money arrives to the health facilities, which is a question that we cannot answer because we are not doing this monitoring. We are doing the monitoring for our own project. We have noticed there is a lot of big lack of monitoring, and we really question the efficiency of the money that is sent to Yemen, because we still see a humanitarian situation that is not improving. And this, we see it through some epidemics that we have seen the last year, of measles, because there is no more primary health care, for example. So there's a lot of measles epidemic. We had a diphtheria epidemic. And since March, we have a second big cholera epidemic that has started, that promised to be bigger than the one that was in 2017. That was already quite big.
Yeah. Perhaps in terms of your operations in Yemen as an organization, as an NGO working in Yemen, what are the main challenges for you to work there? Either in terms of political challenges, limitations, or perhaps also the corruption that you may see in the actors you are working with, or the economic situation in terms of also the funding that may be available to you or not, or other forms of difficulties that you've encountered in your work.
Yes. So one of the big difficulties that we have, we have two big difficulties among others. The first one would be the security of our team. So it's a very different challenge in the north and in the south. no, in Ansala controlled area and in Hadi government controlled area. It's a very different challenge. In Houthi controlled area, there is some security in the ground, in the sense that they are providing a quite efficient security system in the ground. And there is one authority that you can refer to. So you don't really fear being robbed or being taken at gunpoint by an unknown armed group. The people that have the arms are controlled by the Houthis. So in a way, you know who to talk to. So the security risk in this sense is really coming from the air and from the battle in the field. So it's coming from the bombing. We are working in Haidan, and we were working also in Hodeida. And so in Hodeida, there was a lot of hot conflict when we were in Hodeida. The front line was in the city. So we were seeing stray bullets. We were seeing sometimes some fighter coming through close to the hospital. And in Saada, we receive people that have been bombed by air. And we have a very heavy system of that we call deconfliction, to make sure that we will not be victim of airstrike. As you may have noticed, it doesn't always work, since MSF facilities have been bombed several times. But we are working on that, and we are forcing this deconfliction system, which does not apply to ambulances, because we cannot plan 1 week in advance our ambulances travel. So it only works for planned trips and for fixed structures. In the south, in Aden and in Moha, the problems are a bit different. Especially in Aden, the security that we face is that there is many armed groups, including some that have the legitimate authority, let's say, that are, for me, it's sort of a balkanization of the situation, and we don't know who to address, and we don't know who to talk to, because there are too many, and that there's a lot of people with arms in Aden. And there's a lot of fightings in Aden between different groups and that are rivals. We see many of them coming to our hospital, because the hospital we have in Aden is specialized in trauma care. And there is a lot of risk also of kidnapping for our teams. So in some ways, the security situation for us in Aden it's much worse than the security situation in Sana'a, for example, or even in Haidan. And the second big issue that we have in implanting the humanitarian project in Yemen is administrative obstruction. So in this administrative obstruction, I would say they both play the same game a little bit. They even sometimes communicate to each other what kind of new paperwork they can ask from an NGO. It's very difficult first to enter the country. To enter the country in the Houthi-controlled area, you need also to have a visa from the south government, the Hadi government, that will give a visa only if you have project in the south. So if you need to be registered in both with both government. And then you need authorization to move in the country. You need an authorization to move in the south, and you need an authorization to move in the north. You need an authorization to move anywhere. There is a special special case for Saada, because to go to Saada, you also need the authorization from the security of the local government of Saada to be able to move on in Saada and to Saada. So there is this travel permit problem that comes after the deconfliction that has been done with the coalition in order not to be airstriked. So the visa, the travel permit, and then the many authorization to be able to work in any place that comes after long discussion. So it reached a point where it's administrative obstruction, I would say. It's very difficult to point a finger on it, and that's why we don't really communicate on that, because it's only delays. It's only a need for negotiation. It also happens in many other countries where a humanitarian agency works, so it's not completely specific to Yemen. It's quite heavy in Yemen. And it prevents most of the humanitarian actors to actually go to the field and monitor the project and even implement the project. Knowing that the travel permits are required also for Yemeni nationals that can not move freely in their own country if they are working for an NGO.
So, I don't know if you...
No.
Okay. So you mentioned also before that you worked also in other contexts, and you also now mentioned that the situation and the difficulties faced in Yemen are not unique. But the UN and also other organizations have now said that Yemen is the largest man-made disaster, humanitarian catastrophe in the world now. Why is that? Why the humanitarian situation has developed so badly in Yemen compared to other contexts? Why, for instance, we've seen the resurgence of cholera, of other diseases, preventable diseases mostly, and why this resurgence has been so acute in Yemen, do you think?
I wouldn't. I think it's difficult to say the worst humanitarian crisis. I mean, there's many humanitarian crises, and I've been working in South Sudan, and it's pretty terrible there. And it's also man-made mostly. But it's quite a bad humanitarian crisis. But there is mostly also a very huge response, and there is a very big humanitarian response to this crisis, in terms of money at least, and in terms of, for example, food entering the country. There is, WFP planned to import food for 12 million people as a general food distribution. So in addition to regular commercial food import, in addition to all the specifically nutrition project that we could have for very specific nutrition issues. So, I mean, I'm not the UN, so I would not say why the UN are saying it's such a terrible, it's the most terrible, the worst humanitarian crisis. But I assume that there's a big political part on it, and it's also to put pressure on the actors, since there are actors you could put pressure on this issue.
You mentioned the food entering the country, and recently, actually, there were accusations that both sides, the Houthis, but also the militias that are fighting with the government, are looting either food or humanitarian aid entering into the country. You mentioned that there is a lot of money being invested in Yemen from humanitarian organizations and from the UN as well. Has this money being spent effectively? Has it been wasted in its use in Yemen because of corruption, or where do you think it can be used maybe more effectively?
For me, in a way, the money has been used somehow effectively because of the amount of food that entered the country. Then the price have not increased that much. They have increased a lot, but not that much. It has not been multiplied by 10, only by 3 since 2015, according to WFP baskets. And that is why we don't see a big catastrophe, actually. I think it's part of it. It's because there is a humanitarian response that we don't see the catastrophes that we are announcing that we are going to. In a way, we are responding before the catastrophe. So yes, there has been some efficiency in the humanitarian aid. Then we don't see a lot of monitoring. So there is some money that is being put in Yemen. There is food coming to Yemen. WFP 4 days ago said they might suspend their food imports in Houthi controlled area because they cannot monitor and they cannot choose their beneficiaries, which is I mean, quite a strong move from WFP. But also from what I've heard when I was, for example, in Saada, is that the food don't go out of the country. So somehow the food do benefit the people, be it by the decrease of the price and the not increase of the price because of the embargo and the lack of food, or because it's distributed to some beneficiary that might not be the targeted beneficiary, but there are some people that receive this food. We assume that, for example, in Saada Governorate, what we see and what we think, again, there is no monitoring, so it's what we think based from a very limited sample, is that the food is probably distributed instead of targeting very vulnerable beneficiaries. The food is distributed to everybody, but with a cut ration. Instead of having a full ration, they only have a third. But everybody will receive it, which will maintain some support in the population for the Houthi, since they are providing food to the people. So it would make sense that the food would stay in Yemen, and that at one point they will reach some population because they need the support of the population. Yeah.
No, that's if actually aid was being used effectively and if it was actually reaching the goals. So yeah, I think you responded. I'd move maybe now to Franck and maybe introduce your part here by reminding that actually 29 years ago, in these days, Yemenis were celebrating national unity. And indeed now, Yemen looks fragmented as ever, or at least very fragmented. And we've seen how this has reflected into the conflict with the presence of several militias fighting across the country, but also on the humanitarian situation, how the duplication of authorities is impacting intervention. So I just wanted to introduce your intervention here by asking what has changed since then, if it's possible to answer, and perhaps also how 5 years of war, nearly 5 years of war, have changed Yemeni politics, so political parties, how fragmented they are, society, even national identity.
Thank you. Bonjour à tous. Good afternoon. I think one of the reasons of the war, there is many reasons for this war, but one of the reasons is the failure of unity in 1990. I mean, which is now we see some of the results of this failure in this war, in this current war. The paradox of this war is that since the intervention of the Arab coalition in March 2015, the international recognized government of President Hadi has become weaker and fragmented. While the two major regional actors, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, have provided decisive military support for the reconquest of the south, as has been mentioned before, and in the north, also from the city of Taiz and part of the Tiama coastal region, the United Arab Emirates have deliberately undermined the influence of President Hadi and his government in Yemen. And so the degree of cohesion of the various countries in Yemen vary enormously, in the territories which they are supposed to control. One of the causes also of the war, of the conflict, was Ansar Allah, as they are called officially, the Houthis. It was Ansar Allah refusal to endorse the formula of federal Yemen, divided into six provinces, six aqlim, proposed by President Hadi in 2014, following the National Dialogue Conference. Why? Because they didn't have also the port of Hodeidah, they didn't have resources, and so there are many reasons for this refusal. We have also to stress upon a very important fact in Yemen, which characterizes Yemen comparatively to the other Gulf countries, is that Yemen is still predominantly rural. I mean, 70%, nearly 70% of the population lives in the countryside. But it is also experiencing a strong urban expansion since the unity of Yemen. And we have witnessed the increasing role of regional urban centers like Hodeidah, Taiz, Aden, Saada, which have asserted themselves as competing political poles. One of the reasons also of the national dialogue, the national conference dialogue, was also to treat the threat of the southern separatism. I mean, there was an increase of the southern movement since 2007. And we must also not forget that President Hadi also is from the south. He's from the region of Abian, and it was a way also to deal with the threat of separatism in the south. Since the war, as it has been mentioned, there is now two parallel state apparatuses which are supposed to govern the country. But the power is more or less fictitious, depending on the regions and the balance of local powers. While the territories under Houthi domination are closely controlled, and especially with also the system of mushrifin, the supervisors which are supervising not only the army but also the administration, President Hadi's power is weak and has difficulty to impose himself in the regions of Yemen supposedly under his administration. On the Houthi side, we can also witness a kind of consolidation of the power of the Houthi family inside the state apparatus. For example, the dissolution of March 17 of this year of the Supreme Revolutionary Committee chaired by Mohammed Ali al-Houthi, and his integration into the Supreme Political Council established in July 2016 and composed of 10 members belonging to Ansar Allah and the General People's Congress, is a means of threatening the hold of Al-Houthi family clan on his executive body. The cohesion of the armed forces of either side presents the same contrast. The Houthi regime strengthened its control over the armed force chain of command during the war, which enabled them, in particular, to deal with Ali Abdullah Saleh's attempt insurrection in December 2017. In the opposite camp, military fragmentation prevails with the proliferation of armed groups of different dominations that compete for control of the territories in which they are deployed. And so the part of Yemen which is not under the power of the Houthis is divided into different zones of military and political influences in which Saudi Arabia and the UAE exercise an opaque control and pursue also often contradictory strategies for the conduct of the war and the country's future. For example, Aden, which is supposedly President Hadi provisional capital, is very rarely visited by President Hadi, whose power is contested by the Southern Transitional Council created in the city of Aden in May 2017, with the support of the United Arab Emirates. But within the separatist camp itself, I mean in the south, the Southern Transition Council faces other separatists fighting against the United Arab Emirates' control of southern affairs. The Emirates has also encouraged and supported the creation of militias. In Aden, the security belt, Al-Hazam al-Amni, commanded by the Salafist leader Hani Ben Brek, who is allied with Haydarus al-Zubaydi's forces, fought against the presidential guard led by Nasser, the President Ali's sons, in February 2017 and January 2018. So the popular anger against the Emirates policy has progressively increased in the south and is reflected in the organization of numerous demonstrations in Aden against arbitrary detentions and the death under torture of detainees imprisoned in the security belt prisons. The growing influence of the United Arab Emirates within the southern provinces and its support for the separatist forces prompted a late Saudi reaction, which culminated in the creation in April 2018 of the Southern National Alliance, which brings together political forces allied to President Hadi. For example, the pro-Hadi current of the General People's Congress, factions of the Southern Movement, the Yemeni Congregation for Reform, which is the Islamist party, Al-Islah, the Nasserist, Salafist parties. However, the Southern National Alliance was unable to organize its first founding congress in Cairo in March 2019 because the Egyptian authorities finally refused to authorize it, a refusal that is probably linked to pressures from the Emirates. In Hadramaut, the war also, as in the south, has also extended the influence of the UAE on this province in the south as a whole, and also the creation by the UAE of other forces, other militias, like Hadrami elite and Shabwa elite, under the guise of fighting Al-Qaeda. There is also a big and strong increasing influence of the Saudi Arabia in the eastern province of Mahra, with also the creation of Wahhabist educational center, which led to also demonstrations against the Saudi presence in Al-Mahra. So we can move now to the northern fronts in the north. Because the main lines, the front lines between the Houthi troops and the President Hadi, the Arab coalition, are mainly in the territory now of the former North Yemen. But the conflict is not limited to a struggle between the Houthis and the governmental forces. It is also a struggle of influence between the various components supposed to be allied against the Houthis. For example, The Yemeni troops participating in the Battle of Hodeidah are composed of 1,000 fighters, grouped in the Al-Amalika brigades, for example, commanded also by Salafist officers. There is also the units of the Republican guards affiliated with the national, what is called the national resistance, led by the nephew of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. The nephew is called, his name is General Tariq Saleh, and also some units of the Tihama resistance, which is active on this front. These formations are under the supervision or the control of the Arab coalition, but not under the supervision of the Yemeni government, of the Hadi government, and they don't even pay allegiance to President Hadi. Finally, President Hadi, with feet of clay, only appears to control military and administratively, perhaps, two regional bases. However, sociologically contrasted, namely the city of Taiz and the Marib region. The first, Taiz, after being liberated from the occupation of the Houthi troops, have been partially dominated by the Abu Abbas Salafist militias, which finally handed over its position to the government army in August 2018. The repetition of the Adeni scenario seems to have failed in Taiz, sorry. Adeni scenario seems to have failed in Taiz, where the Salafi militia lost its hegemonic position despite Emirati support. Indeed, the strong influence of the Yemeni Congregation for Reform in Taiz, Al-Islah, particularly within some armed factions, have reportedly led to a selective support for anti-Houthi resistance by the United Arab Emirates, but also by Saudi Arabia. We all remember perhaps the eviction of one leader of the resistance in Taiz against the Houthi, Al-Mikhlafi, which was obliged to go out of the country, and now perhaps he's still in Istanbul, where he opens a restaurant, I think. And so he was perhaps considered to be too close to Al-Islah, or not to represent anyway the UAE influence or interest in the city. In the east of the country, we have also another region, Marib, which is under the control of under the authority of President Hadi, and of one of the key figures of the regime, the General Ali Mohsen, who is the vice president since April 2016. And this region, Marib, has turned into a stronghold from which operations are conducted against the Houthi troops in the north. But it's not we cannot properly say that Marib belongs to the influence of Al-Islah completely, because also there is in Marib a very strong tribal factor, which is symbolized by the effective power of a sheikh, of the governor of Marib, Sheikh Sultan al-Arada, who is the leader of a big tribal group there. So in conclusion, the war in Yemen has led to the emergence of new armed actors and has accentuated the phenomenon of regional political centers, which were already present, but now their role has increased in Yemen, particularly as a result of direct interference by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, whose policy has led to a generalized subservience of local actors, some of whom have set themselves up as counterpowers, threatening the very integrity of Yemen. Some of these regional pools have become the focus of internal rivalries for their control, as in Aden, Mukalla, Mahra, Socotra, and Taiz, and have become incubators of future internal wars. Thank you.
I think we can open the floor for discussion, and of course, if you have any questions, we have three notable speakers that can answer about politics, about a conflict, about the humanitarian situation, and more broadly about intervention in Yemen. So, what is yours?
Is there really...
Just a minute.
Thank you. Well, thank you for being here. And my question is about the role of Egypt and Sudan. Is it true that there are any Egyptian or Sudanese troops in Yemen? And thank you.
اوكي. طبعا هناك قوات سودانية في اليمن، تحديدا في الساحل الغربي، وهي ما يطلق عليها تحديدا قوات الدعم السريع التي يقودها حميدتي، وهي تحديدا كانت مشاركة في المعركة في المكان، لكن الآن تقوم بعملية التدريبات. السودانية
There was definitely there is troops, Sudanese troops, mainly situated in the western coasts of Hodeidah.
القوات المصرية تحديدا السفن البحرية المصرية تقوم بتأمين السواحل المساعدة مع الحرب.
Mainly the Egyptian forces are situated in the sea within the Egyptian ships trying to protect the waters in Saudi. Not more than that with Egypt.
تأثيرهم
طبعا المصريين المصريين لديهم قلق حقيقي على فكرة ما يحدث في الساحل. أنا سمعت ذلك.
Egyptians are really concerned of what happens in the western coasts of Hodeidah, and especially with the security of the Red Sea. It's the concern of Egypt, Ethiopia, those countries that have real interest in the Red Sea. Jordan, Israel, all of them are concerned of what's happening.
المصريين تحديدا لا يريدون أي تضارب على الأقل علني في النقاشات مع السعوديين والإماراتيين.
There is not much happening with Egypt. Egypt is a bit concerned of putting themselves under the crossfire between Saudi and the UAE.
And I think today the head of the Rapid Support Forces, which is actually the militia fighting for Sudan in Yemen, was meeting with a Saudi prince to actually reinstate Sudanese support after the ousting of al-Bashir in April. So there's continuous support, yeah, also for the future.
Quite often when there is an internationalization of a conflict, it's because there is a hidden oil or mines, and so everybody is interested in the rich countries, maybe hidden. And why is it that Yemen has become such an international conflict? Is it the geographic strategic situation, or why is that?
Can you repeat the question?
Well, as far as I know, there is no oil or rare minerals in Yemen. And very often when a conflict becomes international, it's because a lot of people are interested in these hidden riches. And this is not the case in Yemen, as far as I know. So why is it that, Yemen is where there is an international conflict?
We are a poor country next to a lake of oil.
هذا مهم وهذا يبعث على القلق.
That's important, but it also brings concerns.
ناهيك إنه نحن مرتبطين بواحد من أهم محاور الصراع الإقليمي.
We are also connected to one of the key regional conflicts,
اللي هو الصراع الإيراني.
which is the Saudi-Iranian conflict, in addition to the US-Iranian conflict.
في جوار باب المندب حيث حجم التجارة الدولية وحركة النفط عالي.
Bab al-Mandab, which is the Al-Mandab Strait, which is also a channel for the international commercial movement.
ثالثا أو رابعا اليمن كانت واحدة من الدول التي تراقب بقلق لأسباب أمنية وخصوصا موضوع الإرهاب.
Yemen is one of the regions that has been observed with regards to the terrorism.
خامسا أيضا انخفاض وتيرة الاهتمام بالملف السوري والصراعات الأخرى بدأت تسويتها. الآن نحن نتصاعد كملفات.
Also because the other regional files like Syria is getting less attention or is getting more quieter, and so Yemen is getting the more attention now.
هذا بشكل.
This is essentially.
If you want to add or...
I want to say that we are always...
it's not active, yeah. Yeah. Should be.
We always stress upon the international dimension of this war, of the regional dimension of the war, and above all the conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. In the same time, I think that the war didn't begin in March 2015 with the intervention of the coalition. It began in 2014.
The microphone, please.
Ça marche pas? Okay, so what I wanted to say is that we are always stressing upon the regional dimension of this war with the conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia and things like that. We say that this war began in March 2015 with the intervention of the coalition, Arab coalition, led by Saudi Arabia. I don't think that the war began in March 2015 because it began before, in 2014. We don't have to forget also the conflict between the Houthis and President Hadi forces, and the alliance between the Houthis and President Ali Abdullah Saleh to regain his power, and the invasion, the conquest of Sana'a in 21 September 2014, when the Houthis launched an offensive against Sana'a, and there was nearly no resistance against them. So I think that there is also, we must not forget the internal causes of this war, which are very important. For example, the refusal of the Houthis of the federal system, of the division of the country in 6 provinces, but also the willingness of ex-President Ali Abdullah Saleh to regain his power, and his counter-nature alliance with the Houthis, which was considered by other peoples of Yemen as a northern alliance against them. For that, there was a strong resistance in Taiz and in Aden against this northern, what was considered as a northern alliance, a new invasion of the south by the northerners. So I think the internal reasons of the war must not be minored. Yes.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the information. My question is about the sustainability for Saudi Arabia to keep on this course, because it's not just Yemen. It's in Libya. It's even in Algeria, where they're trying through proxies to derail the peaceful revolution there. And is it really sustainable for them, especially that it's a costly war, and it's and history teaches that this kind of strategy it does not really work, because what Saudi Arabia is doing now in the Arab world is the exact replica of what Russia did in Europe in the 19th century. There were springs in Europe in the 19th century. The Polish Spring, the Hungarian Spring in 1848, and Russia was acting as the custodian of conservative order and reactionary order in Europe, the way Saudi Arabia is doing in the Arab world. The consequences for Russia were disastrous. because they exhausted their resources to the point that they were humiliated by Japan in 1905. Then they were no match to the German army in 1914, and the army collapsed. Then 3 years later, the entire Tsarist regime collapsed. So is Saudi Arabia going to escape the same fate? I mean, maybe that's too much wishful thinking, but I mean.
يعني طبعا الله أعلم متى ستسقط لكنها ستستمر. على المدى المنظور السعودية لا تستطيع أن تغادر هذه المعركة، ليست أنها لا تريد.
For sure, the Saudi will continue. The idea is not, Saudi is not planning to, or it's not about them being able to move, but they actually doesn't want to leave Yemen.
لديها مشكلة حقيقية وهي وجود خطر مباشر على حدودها.
They have a great concern, which they have threat within their southern borders.
ومشكلة أخرى لا تدري ماذا تفعل مع هذا الخطر.
And the other problem is they have no idea how to deal with this threat.
مشكلة حقيقية في الأداء السعودي، لديك مشكلة حقيقية في الأداء السعودي.
There is a huge problem in the performance of Saudi.
السعودية ليست معنية في اليمن. ليست مهتمة بالحفاظ على اليمن، هي مهتمة بحماية نفسها.
Saudi is not interested in maintaining Yemen. It's what its concern is just to securing Saudi.
إذا استطاعت الوصول للتسوية ستذهب، لكن هي لا تستطيع الوصول إلى التسوية الآن. شروط الحوثيين، طبيعة أدائهم، تكوين الجماعة المقاومة أيضا لا يساعد السعودية على خفض سقفها السياسي، سقفها العسكري.
Saudi, if there is an agreement to be reached, I think they would be welcoming it. But given the nature of Houthis' demands, with a very high selling, is not encouraging Saudis also to decrease their demands towards Houthis as well.
ثانيا أيضا محمد بن سلمان تورط في هذه المعركة بشكل ما، هي صارت جزء من إرثه المباشر.
Also, Mohammed bin Salman is trapped in this problem. It's one of its. He inherited this problem.
يعني هو فعلي لا هو صارت جزء من إرثه المباشر مش ورثة. يعني من رأس ماله جزء من.
It is becoming one of its legacies.
يعني فهو ضروري يصل إلى شيء فيها.
He needs to achieve something out of the conflict.
وبالمقابل هي تستخدم، هي واحدة من أدوات التهييج الداخلية السعودية في مواجهته.
And also this is one of the tools being used against him within Saudi.
وأيضا هي فرصة سياسية لكثير من خصومه الإقليميين، فرصة عسكرية من خصومه الإقليميين للدخول إلى اليمن لمهاجمة السعودية ومهاجمة.
And also
حرب اليمن باب دوار حقيقي لكثير من الأطراف.
And it's also a great opportunity for his opposing regional parties to come to Yemen and fight Saudi through Yemen. So Yemen is more of a door open to the different regions' conflicts.
السعودية الآن فعليا السعودية تتقاتل صحيح في اليمن مع الحوثيين، لكن هناك الكثير من الفاعلين الذين يمدون أصابعهم في اليمن لأنها تشكل فرصة لهم جميعا.
It's true that Saudis are fighting Houthis in Yemen, but also we cannot deny the fact that there are other regional players who are actually contributing to this conflict and also using this opportunity to fight Saudi.
Perhaps can I just add a follow-up question to yours and maybe just to direct to Frank. How the Saudis are, or whether, let's say more, if the Saudis are actually supporting local actors in Yemen, like the United Arab Emirates with militias, are they trying to expand their influence within Yemen from your...
I think that there is perhaps a perspective of division of Yemen, and the regional actors are playing on this perspective, on this ground. I mean, for example, UAE are trying to expand their influence in the south, that's for sure. But in the same time, they are also helping Tariq Saleh, the nephew of ex-President Ali Abdullah Saleh, in the north, because it is their northern card in the north. So in the perspectives of a division of Yemen, they will have two actors, two players. One in the south with the Southern Transitional Council, and the other one in the north with General Ali Mohsen, was now, with General Tariq Saleh, was now who is now playing an active part in the battle of Hodeidah. In the same time, the Saudi Arabia, as it has been said by Majed, have a very strange attitude in Yemen, in the sense that perhaps we can consider that they completely mismanage the Yemeni problem from their side. They completely mismanaged it at the military level, and also at the administrative or political level. And so they try now, just recently, perhaps to counteract the influence of the UAE by trying to expand their influence also on other parts of Yemen, which are considered traditionally closer to Saudi Arabia, which is Maghreb, for sure, with General Ali Mohsen, and also Hadramaut and Mahra. Hadramaut, the Saudi Arabia try in Hadramaut to counter the influence of the Southern Transitional Council, and they try also to create also southern organization, which are against the division south and north, but perhaps which are leaning to a kind of autonomy of Hadramaut, which is traditionally has many links with Saudi Arabia. So I think, but both, what I wanted to say in my paper is that both, in a way, weaken very much the power of President Hadi. And it seems that Hadi, for example, for me, doesn't have any importance for them. He is not the key player on the ground in Yemen. The key players are the Umara al-Harb, I mean the war, the warlords, like Ali Mohsen in the north, Tariq Saleh in the north, and the others in the south, like the Southern Transitional Councils. And for UAE also, they tried to weaken the Hadi government mainly ties with in supporting the Salafist militias, which is still a strong actor in the governorate region. But we see in ties particularly that there is fighting which is always on a regular basis between different forces in Taiz region, Taiz governorate, for the control of this region, which is supposed to be one under the control of the international recognized government.
Did the Houthi, are they contesting the 1934 agreement between Saudi Arabia Kingdom at that time and Yemen, Imam Yahya, about which led to the separation of the Asir provinces and its connection to Saudi Arabia, and and this agreement has been renewed a few years ago. And if they are not doing it, should they do it?
يعني ما استطيع انصحهم بحاجه انا لكن اظن تحديدا فيما يخص الحوثيين
I can't advise Houthis or advise in this matter.
لكن اظن الحوثيين لم يقدموا خطاب واضح.
Houthis did not present a very clear discourse in a political field.
خطاب دوغما متصل بقضية فكرة العدوان والتصدي له، لكن لم يقدموا رؤية واضحة فيما يخص التحديات العامة للبلد أو المطالب التي يعلنوها فيما يخص حدود اليمن أو فيما يخص تصور شكل الحكم. لازال الجماعة نشأت في إطار.
So the Houthis have not presented their agendas with regards to Yemen and their goals within Yemen. Their only discourse has been focused on countering the aggression of Saudi Arabia, and that has been only their slogan. They haven't been talking about the interests of them within Yemen's borders with Saudi, for instance, among other interests. So their discourse is only focused on fighting the aggression of Saudi Arabia.
للتفكير بشكل بسيط يعني فعليا الحوثي هي جماعة نشأت في جدل الصراع، هي نشأت كجماعة مقاتلة دينية ولم تطور خطاب سياسي.
Houthis has emerged as a fighting religious ideological group, and they haven't been developing their political discourse in the right manner.
لذلك لا يتعرف أحد فعليا على المطالب الحقيقية لها، باستثناء طبعا الخبرة التاريخية تحديدا بجماعات الزيدية المقاتلة اللي تتصل بفكرة السيطرة على الحكم وإعادة إنشاء نظام التاريخ القديم للإمامة.
So it's really hard to know what their demands are and what their objectives are, except for their historical main demand, which in Zaydism, which they have to take over power.
وإعادة فرض نظام الإمامة
and also reintroduce the Imamate regime.
تأتي على خلفية الحراك الديني المسلح بالمناطق الزيدية، لكن هذه الجماعة فعليا لا
part of
اليمن ولا بشيء آخر، لم تنتج معرفة واضحة فيما تخص.
This is part of their religious agenda and ideology, but in regards to Yemen in general, they haven't been producing any objectives or any goals of what they want to achieve.
So instead of a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars, as a humanitarian response was given to Yemeni, but the situation is still the same, at least as it is expressed by the UN. And nowadays there is a popular company demanding the transparency from the UN and the NGOs and the auditing reports. There is documents demonstrate that only 11% of money as aid was given to the people, and the rest it was operating express. So can we talk actually now about the failure in human work in Yemen?
The main difficulty in humanitarian work in Yemen is really the lack of monitoring and the lack of access to the beneficiary. So basically, for example, when I go to see health facilities that we do not support, so I take some information on it, and I'm told, okay, it's support already by this organization, and I go to the facility and I don't see anybody. Sometimes it's closed. So I go back to the organization and I say, well, you said that you are supporting this facility, and it's closed. So the people cannot receive health care. And they say, but we are actually sending the money to somebody. So the Ministry of Health or the director of the hospital. So it shouldn't be closed. And so I'm telling them, well, if it shouldn't be closed, then you have a problem because you are sending money and you are not controlling what you're doing. And I think that right now in Yemen, it's the main problem. Is really for the organization, be it the UN or even international NGO or national NGO, is their capacity in some way to spend the money and to control where the money is spent, that need to be reinforced. All the monitoring need to be reinforced. But for that, people need to be able to send other people in the ground that are also qualified people. And then you have the problem of administrative obstruction. And you have the problem of bombing. Because sometimes it's not administrative obstruction, it's for your own security, you are forbidden to go in this place. Or you can go, but you cannot do the deconfliction with the Saudi before. So you expose your team to eventually an airstrike. So you won't go there. So there's these obstacles to really monitor what's going on the ground, and yes, there must be corruption. I don't know any country where there is no corruption. I've not seen it obviously. I cannot say this guy has become richer. But then again, Yemen was not a very egalitarian society before. So it's a bit complicated to because again you cannot monitor. It's a bit complicated to say the money is going there, or only 20% of the money is going to the beneficiary, or 80%. Nobody knows, actually. And that is a problem.
Marhaban. I have two questions, actually. The first one is, we speak about the humanitarian aid, we speak about the focus of the international actors to deliver this aid, but is there a place for stabilization projects in this context? Are we ready after this post-conflict, or where actually we are in a phase where it's not clear, the situation is not clear on the ground, but is there a place now, because we have economic problems. It's not only at the humanitarian levels, but we have to work on the economy itself. So is there a place for this? My second question is, what scenarios do you have for the future of Yemen? Maybe 3 scenarios, I don't know, fragmentation of the country, I don't know, from your own experience. Thank you.
Shall we start from here?
طبعا هذا احد السؤال $1 مليون زي ما يقولوا.
This is a $1 million question.
فعليا غير واضح المسار التي ستذهب له اليمن طبعا.
It's a vague future where Yemen is going to.
على الأقل على المدى المنظور نحن سنشهد تثبيت خطوط القتال، يعني لا فرصة لأحد أن يحقق نصر حاسم ضمن الأداء الحالي للأطراف على الأقل.
For now, I think there's going to be consistency in the front lines. Both sides will still be on the ground and fighting, and there will not be decisive victory from any side.
ليست عندي وهم إنه قضايا مثل إعادة تصميم البلد بطريقة مختلفة عما كانت ستكون أحد نتائج هذه الحرب.
I don't think of how Yemen should be structured after this conflict, or should we start the discussion of restructuring it.
لكن هل ستنقسم اليمن؟ هذه أحد الأسئلة.
But the question is, will Yemen be divided?
لأنه هناك كلف أمنية وكلف سياسية عالية لموضوع هذا.
There are security and political high cost of this division in Yemen.
دعني أذكر ببساطة إنه يمن منقسم يعني مزيد من الصراع.
Let me clarify or repeat this again. Divided Yemen means more conflicts.
وأيضا المزيد من الفراغات الأمنية حيث تنشط جماعات أساسا تهدد الأمن الدولي ليست فقط الأمن.
And also the more of vacuum will help the extremist groups to grow more and more, and that's not only a threat on Yemen but also on the international level as well.
اللي تبدو ملحة أيضا هو إنه هذه القوى التي تقاتل ستثبت حصص على الأرض ومن ثم ستثبت هذه الحقائق كجزء من اتفاق سياسي.
أيضا
هذه القوى التي تقاتل الآن ستثبت الأراضي التي في يدها ومن ثم ستحصل على حصة في الحكم بناء على حجم هذه الأراضي.
But what I could foresee is these different sides will have strong hold of the areas that they're fighting in now, and that will help them to have part of the pie of the power.
والأمم المتحدة جيدة دائما في جعل حقائق القوة اتفاقات سياسية.
And UN is really good at making de facto powers political realities.
هي لا تقدم حلول، هي تقوم بتثبيت الواقع من ثم صناع صياغة بروتوكولية.
It doesn't provide solutions, rather than they stabilize the de facto powers, and it seems that what's going to happen in Yemen. What is that going to happen? It seems that it will take a while.
Do you want to add anything?
About the stabilization phase. So I work for an emergency NGO, and we don't see ourselves going out of the country very soon. And yeah, I don't think we are in the stabilization phase for the moment.
I will not add many things about what has been already said, because I completely agree with what I've said, Majed. But what I wanted to say is that the one of another drama of Yemen war is the fact that the solution is not now in the hands of the Yemenis. I mean, it's in the hands of the regional powers, international powers, but not in the hands of Yemenis. And perhaps our role, I don't know, a role for the people who are interested in, are concerned by this war in Yemen, is to perhaps to help Yemenis to get to be involved in their own solutions. I think there is a lot of now, as Majed or others, Yemenis who are on exile, who are in thousands of Yemenis are now in Cairo, representing perhaps all the trends, political trends of Yemen. And it's very hard for them perhaps to organize themselves. And perhaps it's one of our role is to help this auto-organization of Yemenis, or to try to arrange for meetings between Yemenis. There have been a lot of meetings which have already been organized in Tunis, in London, and it's always not very successful, I think. But perhaps it's time also to have a kind of national conference which can be organized. I mean, perhaps in a counter level, in a kind of alternative to the power, to the warlords, which are now in the ground. And the other thing what I wanted to say is that there is an article of Majed Al-Madhaghi, which has been translated into French in the book Yemen écrire la guerre, which is about the expansion of Salafism in the south. And with him there are also other Yemeni authors which has been translated and who dealt with the war and also with the revolution of Yemen in 2011. And I think that to give more space to Yemeni voices can be also a way to try to let this Yemeni war be more understood internally than considering that all Yemenis are only puppets of regional forces. Thank you.
مرحبا. ممكن أطرح سؤالي بالعربي وترجم للأخ ماجد. عندي سؤالين.
يصلي على طول.
طيب إذا نترجم للحضور. Bon, j'ai deux questions. La première, je vais le formuler en arabe, pour Majed, et puis la deuxième pour Claire. السؤال الأول للأخ ماجد. الآن نحن أمام سيناريو مقيت أو مظلم حسب ما سمعنا منكم وحسب ما نشاهده. فهل نحن
Can you hear me? Yes. My question is to Majid. First of all, as has been said, we are ahead of a very gloomy future.
الأول هل نحن اتجاه إلى لبنة أو بلقنة اليمن؟
Are we in a way to Libanize the case of Yemen or make it more of the Balkans?
الثانية هل نحن في اتجاه أفغانة اليمن؟
Or also are we on the same direction Afghanistan have been through?
والأخطر حسب ما تكلمت دعم اللامحدود والواضح من قبل الإمارات للجماعات السلفية، وهذا الأخطر. هل نحن باتجاه دعشنة اليمن؟
And also the unlimited support of the UAE in Yemen. Are we leading Yemen to be more of an ISIS hub?
هذا هو سؤالي. السؤال الثاني بالفرنسي ما أعرف الآن وبعدين.
He has another question in French.
Yeah, maintenant. Ma deuxième question, c'est pour Claire. Donc, on savait que le Yémen subit un blocus sans précédent. Et puis voilà le résultat, on le sait. La crise, la plus grande catastrophe humanitaire sur Terre. De plus, nous a révélé aussi qu'il y a une stratégie finalement. Parce que les sites civils, et notamment les sites alimentaires, constituent la troisième cible de la guerre de la coalition au Yémen. Merci.
Let's start from these questions.
عادة الحل على طريقة الترويكة، نسخ الترويكة اللبنانية أو الحل البوسنة والهرسك اللي هو تثبيت ممثلي أطراف بناء على هويتهم العرقية أو الجغرافية، هذا هو الحل الأخير حيث تشكل الحدود.
I think the solution of making Yemen another example like Lebanon, where you stabilize the ideological and political groups that it happened, it is maybe the last resort after all attempts or all other solutions have failed.
وهو حل قاتل لأنه حل أساسا يعيق المجتمع كليا ويثبت تقاسم للبلد.
It's a killing solution. It's because it stabilizes the fragmentations of the community.
وعادة وضمن المؤشرات الحالية على الأقل إذا استمرت وتيرة القتال لفترة طويلة قد يذهب الناس إلى هكذا خيار. لا نريد لكن قد يذهب.
Given the indicators now and the increasing fragmentation of the community, this might be one of the scenarios that might happen. They might not.
يعني فبالتالي لا حقيقة في الأخير في مثلا تفاعلات الحرب اليمن ما زالت قائمة. احتمال تغير الأوزاع على الأطراف ومن ثم كيفية إعادة تمثيلهم على أي قاعدة يمكن يتغير لكن ضمن الحدود الحالية.
Yemen is still under going conflict, and the dynamics might change from now until in the future. But all possibilities are open, but we cannot tell today. Maybe tomorrow we'll have new realities, and that might change our expectation of what the future would look like. But for now, it's hard to tell.
طبعا فيما يخص تحديدا وضع التطرف في اليمن في مسؤولية الجميع في هذا الوضع.
In terms of radicalization, this becomes a responsibility of all sides. Let's remind you of some of the facts.
الإماراتية تتجمع مع جماعات سلفية وعادة الخيوط والفواصل رقيقة بين الجماعات السلفية والقاعدة والداعش.
One of these facts is the UAE support for the Salafist groups, and there is a thin line between these Salafist groups and the extremist Salafist groups, which has to do with ISIS and Daesh.
لكن أيضا يمكن التذكير بأنه الحوثيين بالهوية الطائفية اللي استحدثوها في الصراع منحوا فرصة هائلة للقاعدة وداعش تجند الكثير من الأنصار.
But also we cannot deny the fact that Houthis' extreme ideological ideology is encouraging these extremist groups to counter this ideology and helps them recruit more and more.
لديك دورة مال كبيرة أساسا تساعد دورة سلاح كبيرة تستفيد منها الجماعات المتطرفة ولديك منظومة طائفية أساسا تستنفر الجميع. لديك بيئة مثالية جدا لنمو هذه الجماعات.
You have a very good environment for these extremist groups to grow. There is a big circle of financing among these groups, also a weapons circle that moves between these different militias and extremist groups as well.
Okay,
and then it's open. So what was the question about the...
So the question was about the blocus and the strategy of targeting food process industry. Right?
Strategy de famine.
A famine strategy. So yes, I read also the report on the targeting food processing industry, and it's true also that the production of food in Yemen has decreased since the war. However, the total import commercials and that are monitored by the UN and Humanitarian, also done by the UN, WFP. So if you add what is in their report, the level of import of food is more or less stable. So it's the same amount of import before the war and the embargo and after the war. That said, it seems that the famine discourse and speech is brought by both the coalition, the UN, and also the Houthis. Saying that okay, the Saudis are starving our population, but we do provide some food, or the Saudis saying, you see, the Houthis are starving the population. So there is a lot of propaganda around this famine rhetoric. We as MSF, we really wondered about it because in our hospital we don't see it, and around our hospital we don't see the famine. So we were really puzzled, and we were really afraid that we will miss a big famine in Yemen and not being able to respond, and we're feeling quite guilty about it, not seeing it. But the fact is that we don't see it. So we looked for it, and we still don't see it. So we do question actually the IPC. We do talk with other actors about it. So most of the people said, no, there is a risk of famine. It's exactly when you read what the UN said, it's a risk of famine since several years now. And usually the report is out 1 week before the General Assembly. So I don't think it's completely
by chance.
By chance, yes. I think it has a political agenda. And again, there is a lot of food imported in this country, and it's, I think, and when you talk also with actors on food, is because there is a food insecurity and an economic crisis. That is obvious, but there is no lack of food in Yemen. There is food in Yemen. There is an economic crisis, and there is a lot of people that have lost their income. So the mere fact that the food prices have not increased as much as they could have is already a big humanitarian support. But the food is a strategic tool to politicize humanitarian aid and get some leverage in a war. So I imagine that, yeah, the famine strategy is this.
Osama wanted to add one short comment about the economy.
Yeah, I apologize to do the role of speakers, though my sessions is next. But basically, on regards on the food, there is availability of food in Yemen, but the prices and the ability of people to buy food is the big problem. Because of, first of all, the exchange rate increase, radical increase since the start of the conflict, but also for people not receiving salaries and not having jobs. So that is a really big problem. And that goes back to the question of a stabilizations program and development programs in Yemen. Should they happen? And I think that should happen. And maybe the international organizations should start to do some shift into focusing on injecting development programs within the humanitarian programs, at least not only to provide people with food, but help them generate income and so they could be able to produce food. And there is some safe spaces where that can be practiced and done. There are some areas that that there's a focus. There is some institutions that start working on stabilization and development programs, but not as many. And maybe the humanitarian organizations might put that factor, and I think some of the organizations have started to work on that, but maybe more or expanding on this would be a necessity. Thank you.
Thank you. We actually, we've run out of time. Maybe if it's, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Just a quick follow-up question to the whole idea of the famine and starvation, because we do see pictures every day now in the media of starving children. So the question is, do you think those are isolated cases? To what extent is this starvation happening? If you can maybe elaborate more on that.
Yeah, we do see children that are wasted in the nutrition way. So these pictures are real. First, it's mostly 2 pictures that are in all the media, so there's not that many different pictures. Then what we see in our hospitals are children that are malnourished, but usually it's combined with another disease. So it can also happen even in France to have a children which would look like a child that you would see in Yemen. So the fact that these children are obviously malnourished is not a sign of famine. It doesn't mean that the whole population has a nutrition problem. A famine is defined with when it reaches also adults, and when it's more general in the population or in an area in the country. But when we see malnourished children in our hospital, when they're under 6 months or when they're under 5, so far all the children that I've seen that were malnourished were coming because they had another disease, and it make them in malnutrition situation.
So yeah, we ran out of time, so I'd like to thank all of our speakers here, so Majid and Hossam as well, Claire and Frank.